We had been on the road 11 days when we saw the gate. National Guard Armory, Central Indiana, flat country, the kind of place I had driven past 100 times in another life and never once thought about. Indiana plates on the trucks inside the wire, American flags still flying, 2 soldiers at the pedestrian entrance with rifles slung muzzle down. After 11 days of looted gas stations and shouting through closed doors and one bad night at a pilot truck stop I do not want to talk about. That gate looked like the first solid thing we had seen since the world started peeling. I told the others to keep their hands visible. Then I told them, quieter, not to relax. Because the way the gate guard returned his sergeant's salute was wrong. I had been a soldier for 22 years. I knew what a checkpoint at war looked like and what a checkpoint at peace looked like. This one looked like neither. This one looked like a parade. The boots were polished. 2 weeks into a national outbreak, those boots should not have been polished. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was that no one was speaking on the radio. My name is Ray Halverson. I am 54 years old. I spent 22 years in the United States Army, most of them in motor pool, most of those in the 38th Infantry Division Sustainment Brigade out of Indianapolis. I retired a Sergeant First Class in 2018 and bought a small auto shop in a town called Hartford City, which you have not heard of, and which sits about an hour northeast of the gate I was now standing at. My wife Lynette died of pancreatic cancer in 2021. We did not have children. I lived in the house we had bought together for 31 years, and I worked on cars, and on Sundays I went to the same diner and ordered the same eggs, and that was my life until the world quit being a world. I will not spend long on the outbreak itself. You know what you need to know. It came fast and from everywhere. The first announcements were medical. The next were federal. The next were nothing, because by then there was no one left to announce. The shop closed itself when nobody came in for 3 days. I locked my house and loaded my truck and started driving west, because Lynette's sister lived in Cedar Rapids, and I did not have any other direction to go in. I did not stay alone for long. I picked up Karen Bueller and her brother Marcus on the 3rd day outside a Casey's General Store in Crawfordsville. She was 36, a high school history teacher, with a face that had not slept in a week. Marcus was 17, 6'1", and had not said a full sentence to me for the first 2 days he was in my truck. They had been heading west also. Karen's mother was in a small town in eastern Iowa, and Karen had not been able to reach her by phone for 5 days. She did not say what she thought that meant. She did not have to. I picked up Dale Reuter on the 7th day at a fuel pump in central Illinois that we got working with a drill bit and the wrong kind of optimism. Dale was 56 and a roofer from Champaign. His wife and grown daughters had been in Chicago when the city went. He had stopped trying to call them. He had a soft, Midwestern voice and big hands, and he asked permission for everything for the first day, even to drink water out of his own canteen, until I told him to stop. The 4 of us moved together by something that was not quite agreement and not quite necessity. We had not been a family. We were not yet a crew. We were 4 strangers who had decided, separately, that the next mile was easier with the others in it. We had crossed back into Indiana on day 10 because Karen had heard from a man on a CB radio who was probably lying that the National Guard had stood up a refugee corridor through Lafayette. There was no corridor. There was nothing in Lafayette but rain and an overturned ambulance, and a dog that ran when we tried to call it. We had pushed south after that, because south of Lafayette there was supposed to be a small reserve training installation, and a reserve training installation, in my professional opinion, was the kind of place that might still be functioning. I had been right about it functioning. I just had not been right about what functioning meant. The gate sergeant who waved us forward was a young man named Diaz. I read the name off his uniform. He was clean-shaven. His patrol cap was squared. He looked at our 4 faces and our 2 vehicles, and he asked, with the cadence of a man reading a card he had memorized, whether we were seeking refuge under the civilian sheltering provisions of Operations Order Linden Foxtrot. I told him yes. He said, in the same flat, memorized cadence, that we were welcome at Camp Brennan, and that all civilian arrivals were subject to processing. He told us where to park. He told us not to dismount until escorted. He saluted, and his salute was the salute of a man on a parade ground, and not the salute of a man at the end of the world. We did what he said. Behind me, in the cab of my truck, Dale said, very quiet, "Ray, this is real, right?" I did not answer him. Camp Brennan was a reserve training site, not a full installation. I knew that before we drove in because I knew what existed inside a 100-mile radius of where I had spent half my career. It had a perimeter fence, 3 fixed buildings, a vehicle yard with an overhead bay, and 4 temporary structures that looked like they had been put up in 2009 and not painted since. There was a flagpole. There was a small parade square. There was a guard tower at the southwest corner that was probably built in 1983 and last used in 1991. There were maybe 120 soldiers on it, full strength, which is not nothing for a reserve unit. The thing about a reserve installation is that you do not have a permanent garrison. You have weekenders and a small caretaker staff. And the building stays mostly empty Monday through Friday. So the fact that there were 120 soldiers on it, in uniform, in formation, 2 weeks into a national outbreak, that meant somebody had drilled. That meant somebody had given the order to muster, and the muster had held, and the unit had stayed. That was a very good sign. It was also a very strange sign. We were taken to a low building marked Intake, which had not had a sign reading Intake before this month. A young private with the name Bryant on her uniform took our names and our dates of birth and asked us if we had any medical conditions she should know about. She wrote our answers in a green notebook. She did not have a computer. The computer behind her was on, and the screen was dark, and the cursor was blinking, and she did not look at it. She took our temperatures with a forehead thermometer, 1 at a time. She took our pulses with 2 fingers and a wristwatch. She had us each open our mouths, and she shone a small flashlight into them. Karen made a joke about the dentist. Bryant did not laugh, but the corner of her mouth moved, and I thought she would have laughed 3 weeks ago. She told us we had cleared screening. She told us we were assigned to Transient Billet 3, which was Building 4-North. She told us that mess was at 0700, 1200, and 1730, and that civilians ate after the unit. She told us that we were welcome at Camp Brennan and that the captain extended his greetings. I asked casually when I would be able to thank the captain in person. She said the captain was very busy. She said it the way you say a thing you have been told to say. That was the third thing I noticed. We were walked across the parade square by Specialist Yates, who was the medic. 26, light brown skin, hair pulled back tight, eyes that had seen what 26-year-old medics see in a reserve unit during an outbreak, which I learned later was more than most 26-year-old medics see in a career. She walked us past a formation that was just breaking up. PT formation in the morning at 0900, 2 weeks into the apocalypse. The soldiers were sweating in their PT uniforms and laughing about something. They were laughing. I had been a soldier for 22 years. I had been to the National Training Center 7 times. I had been to Iraq twice and Kuwait once. I had run motor pool through hurricanes and tornado deployments, and one flood that had taken half of southern Indiana. I had never, in any of those things, seen soldiers laugh after PT during a real-world emergency in the second week. There is a kind of laughing you do because you have nothing better to do, and there is a kind of laughing you do because you do not yet know what is happening to you. These men were laughing the second kind. Yates dropped us at Building 4-North and pointed at the bunks and said the bathroom was down the hall and the laundry was open until 1800. She said, "Sergeant Halverson." And I looked at her, because I had not told her my rank. And she said, "If you need anything, ask for me directly." She was looking at me carefully. She had read my intake form. She had seen the Army record. She knew I was a veteran. She wanted me to know that she knew. I asked her, gentle, "Specialist, who's in command here?" She said, "Captain Reeves, sir." I said, "And the captain runs an 0900 Pacific time formation?" Her face did not move. Her mouth did, a little. She said, "Captain Reeves runs the unit, sir. The XO runs the day." I said, "And the XO is?" She said, "Lieutenant Vance." She left. I unrolled my sleeping bag on a bunk that smelled like industrial detergent and the air of a building that had been opened and closed too many times. Karen sat on the edge of the bunk across from me. Marcus sat on the floor. Dale stood by the window and looked out at the parade square. The soldiers had finished their formation. They were drifting toward the mess hall. 2 of them were holding hands. Dale said, "Why are they holding hands?" Karen said, "Boyfriend and girlfriend." Dale said, 2 weeks into this, holding hands." I said, "Dale, sit down." He sat down. He looked at me. He said, "Ray, something is off." I said, "Yes." I did not say more, because I did not yet have anything more to say. But I will tell you now what I should have said then. What I knew already in the part of me that had been a soldier longer than it had been anything else. I knew that an army base does not look like this 2 weeks into a war. I knew that something was holding it together. And I knew, the way you know about a load-bearing beam that has been painted over, that whatever was holding it together was not what it appeared to be. If you were at that gate, with 11 days of road behind you and the nearest other shelter 400 miles away, would you have walked in? I want to know. Where you are listening from, too. Drop a line in the comments. The next part of this gets harder, and the harder it got, the more I wished I had stayed outside the wire. Mess that night was at 17:30. Civilians ate after the unit, which meant we ate at 18:15, which meant we walked into a dining facility that smelled of beef stroganoff and instant mashed potatoes and the unmistakable thin chemical sweetness of a coffee urn that had been burning since before lunch. The soldiers had cleared out. There were 6 other civilians. 3 of them were a family, a man and a woman and a girl about 10, who had been at Camp Brennan for 9 days. The other 3 were a single man and 2 single women, one of whom kept her right hand wrapped in a stained dish towel. None of them looked at us. I sat with my plate next to a man named Hal Peterson, the father of the family. He was a refrigeration technician from Terre Haute. He had been driving north when his radio caught a reserve frequency announcing the camp. He had come in on day 5. I asked him how it was. He said, "It is good." I said, "Yeah?" He said, "It is good." The girl, his daughter, was eating peas one at a time off the end of her fork. She did not speak. The mother did not speak. Hal Peterson ate with the focus of a man who had decided that eating was the only honest activity available to him. I asked, "Have you met the captain?" He said, "Lieutenant Vance handles civilian liaison." I said, "Have you met the captain, though?" He looked at me for the first time. He had the eyes of a man who had figured something out and was waiting for the next person to figure it out also. He said very quietly, "Eat your food, friend." He went back to eating. I ate my food. That night, I lay on my bunk in transient billet 3 and listened to the sounds of a bass that was wrong. There was a rhythm to a functioning reserve installation that I knew the way I knew my own heartbeat. There was the rumble of generators. When the sun went down, Camp Brennan had 2 big diesels, audible from a quarter mile, and they came on at 1900, and they ran straight through. That part was right. There was the patrol cycle, men walking the inner road at 20-minute intervals with a soft scuff of issued boots. That was also right. There were the calls from the radio room, the soft crackle and answer and crackle of a duty cycle on the company net. That was, and here was the wrongness, much too quiet. There should have been radio chatter. There should have been situation reports coming in from outside, even if they were bad. There should have been a higher echelon trying to reach the unit, asking for casualty counts, asking for fuel state, asking for anything. There was nothing. The radios were on. I could hear the carrier hiss. Nobody was saying anything on them, and nobody was calling. A military base in a national emergency that has not received a higher echelon transmission in 14 days is a military base that has been forgotten. And a military base that has been forgotten by its higher echelon and is still running PT formations and polishing boots and laughing at breakfast. That is a military base that does not know it has been forgotten. I got up at 0200 to use the latrine. The hallway light was on. I walked down it in my socks, and as I passed the door to the company office, I noticed 2 things. The first was that the office door had a paper sign on it, hand-lettered in marker that read, CO, Do Not Disturb. The marker was old. The sign had been there a while. The second was that the light was on inside. I stopped. I listened. I heard nothing. No movement, no keyboard, no paper shuffle, no breathing. I walked on, used the latrine, and walked back. The light was still on. I went back to my bunk, and I lay awake until the generators changed pitch at 0500, which they should not have done. The diesels at this base were old M50A3s. I had worked on 3 of them in the 38th, and a healthy M50 holds frequency. A frequency change at 0500 meant somebody was switching loads or a regulator was failing. I do not know why I noticed. I noticed because that is what I had been trained to notice. Noticing is what I have instead of a personality. I got up at 0600 and put my boots on and walked out into the morning. The morning was clean and cold for early autumn, and the parade square was already in motion. I watched the unit muster for PT from the edge of the road. They formed up by platoon. They counted off. Lieutenant Vance walked the line, and he was a man in his late 20s with a face that had been handsome and had quit being handsome about 10 days ago. His eyes had the look I had seen in young officers after their first dust-off, the look of a man holding something inside himself by main force. He gave the orders. The unit ran. He stood at the edge of the parade square and watched them run, and he did not move from that spot for 45 minutes. I walked to the motor pool. The motor pool at Camp Brennan was a single overhead bay with 3 trucks inside it and 4 parked outside, plus 2 Humvees and a fueler. There was a reserve mechanics shop attached to the bay. It was open. There was a man inside it on a creeper under a 5-ton, the soles of his boots sticking out, and the smell of brake cleaner and old grease, and the radio playing low. Actual music, somebody's CD of country songs from 20 years ago. I knocked on the open door frame. The man on the creeper rolled out. He was about my age. white hair under his patrol cap, reading glasses on a chain. The patches on his uniform read Hulkcom and U.S. Army, and the rocker said Sergeant First Class. We looked at each other for a second. He said, "Sergeant Halverson." I said, "Yates told you." He said, "Yates tells me everything." He sat up. He pulled a rag out of his back pocket and wiped his hands on it. He said, 2-2 sustainment out of Indy. I read your file. I said, I read your patch. He said, 42nd Civil Engineer, out of Logansport. I said, Reserve. He said, Reserve. We stood for a while, and I looked around his shop. He had it set up the way I would have set it up. Tools and shadow boards. A clipboard with the maintenance log on the wall, current. A clean drip pan under every leak. He had been keeping his shop the way a man keeps a thing that he has decided to keep. I said, "How are your trucks?" He said, "My trucks are fine." I said, "How is your fuel?" He said, "We have 8,000 gallons of diesel and the fueler is full, and we have not pulled from the strategic stocks because we have not had to." I said, "How are your radios?" He looked at me. He looked at me for a long time. He said, "Sergeant, why don't you go get yourself a cup of coffee? Mess opens for civilians at 08:15. I said, "Sergeant, when did you last receive a higher transmission?" He said, "Get your coffee, Halverson." I left. I walked back across the parade square. The unit had finished PT and was filing toward the mess hall. The two soldiers I'd seen holding hands the day before were walking together again, not holding hands now, but close. Their names, I learned later, were Specialist Mireles and Specialist Chu. Mireles was 23 and from El Paso. Chu was 24 and from Fort Wayne. They had met during AIT and gotten engaged in February. They were on a reserve weekend at Camp Brennan when the outbreak hit, and they had not been outside the wire since. I will tell you about Mireles and Chu later, because what happens to them matters. I went to the mess. I had coffee that tasted like coffee that had stopped being coffee 3 days ago. I ate a piece of toast. I sat for a while watching the soldiers eat. There's a thing soldiers do at breakfast, which is that they talk. They talk about whatever talking is for that morning. Football, a girl, an NCO they are mad at, a ration menu they hate. The talking is the heartbeat of the unit. You can take the temperature of a unit by listening to its breakfast. The soldiers at Camp Brennan were talking about football. It was the second week of October. There was no football. They were talking about football the way men in a hospital waiting room talk about anything other than the room they are waiting outside of. 2 weeks of doing this. 2 weeks of training one another by main collective will to keep the conversation inside a perimeter that did not include the world. I went outside. I walked to the perimeter fence on the north side of the base, where there was a row of pines and a service road. I stood by the fence, and I looked out at the cornfield on the other side. The corn had not been harvested. It was past time. The stalks were dry, and the ears were drooping, and there were no farmers. There were birds, crows mostly, a lot of them. A voice behind me said, "You from Hartford City, Sergeant?" I turned around. It was Hulkcom. He had walked up quiet. He had a thermos in his hand. I said, "I am." He said, "I'm from Logansport. We're an hour apart." I said, "Less." He held out the thermos. I took it. The coffee in it was actual coffee, made with care, and very hot. I drank some of it. He drank some of it after me. We stood there for a minute. 2 old NCOs at a fence at the end of the world. He said, "I have not received a higher transmission in 14 days. I said, "I know." He said, I have not received a transmission from anyone outside this fence in 14 days. The civilian bands are dead. The military bands are dead. The HF setup gets through sometimes, to a guy in Tennessee who does not know any more than we do. I said, "And the captain?" He drank his coffee. He looked out at the corn. He said, "Get your people fed. Stay quiet. Don't ask questions in the mess hall. There are men in this unit who will hurt you for asking the wrong question right now, and they will not know they did it." I said, "Sergeant, I'm not here to hurt the unit." He said, "I know what you're here for. You're here because you have 3 civilians and an old truck, and you got tired. I get that. I have 121 of you, except mine wear my patch, and they have stopped getting tired the way men should get tired." I said, "Sergeant?" He said, "Halverson, drink the coffee. Go back to your bunk. Sleep. We'll talk tomorrow if I decide we should talk tomorrow." I drank the coffee. I gave him back the thermos. I went back to my bunk. I did not sleep. The supply run went out the next morning at 0700. I watched it go from the window of transient billet 3. It was a Humvee in the Lade and a 5-ton in trail, 6 soldiers. They drove out the gate and turned west on the access road, and they were gone. The unit went on with its day. PT had been at 0530 today, earlier than usual. The mess line ran through 0830. I sat in the billet with my people, and we talked, low, about what we should do. Karen wanted to leave. Marcus wanted to leave. Dale wanted to stay because the food was hot, and the building was warm, and his daughters were not coming back. I told them we would decide in the next 2 days. I went back to the motor pool. Hulkcom was not there. A young specialist was working on a starter. He looked at me, nodded, and went back to the starter. I helped him pull it. I had not asked. He had not asked. We worked together for an hour, and we said maybe 9 words to each other. Hulkcom came in at 1000. He saw me at his bench. He nodded at the specialist. The specialist left. Hulkcom said, "I told you to stay in your bunk." I said, "I'm not in your unit, Sergeant." He almost smiled. The corner of his mouth moved. He said, "No, you're not." He sat down across from me. He pulled the maintenance log down and made a note in it. He said, "Why are you here, Halverson?" I said, "I told you, I have 3 civilians and an old truck." He said, "You are at my bench instead of your bunk. Why?" I said, "Because I think the captain is dead." He looked up from the log. He looked at me a long time. He said, "What makes you think that?" I told him. I told him about the office light at 0200. I told him about the door sign. I told him about the way Bryant said the captain was busy. I told him about Vance's face. I told him about the radio silence. I told him that I had been an NCO for 22 years, and I knew the difference between a unit running on a CO and a unit running on a memory. He listened. He did not interrupt. When I was done, he said, "Halverson." I said, "What?" He said, "If you are right, what do you want me to do about it?" I said, "I want you to tell me I'm wrong." He said, "You're not wrong." I sat with that for a long minute. I said, "How long?" He said, "I don't know exactly. He has not been seen in 3 days. Vance closes the office at 2100 and opens it at 0500. Vance carries the captain's signature stamp on his belt. Vance has been doing the captain's morning radio checks in the captain's voice, on a closed frequency to nobody, where some of the soldiers can almost hear him through the office wall." I said, "Jesus." He said, "I have been a reservist for 28 years. Vance has been an officer for 2. He is 26 years old. He has a wife and a daughter in Fort Wayne, and he has not been able to reach them in 2 weeks. He knows what is coming. He knows he is the only thing standing between his unit and 120 rifles in 120 hands that do not know what they are for anymore. He is keeping the captain alive because he does not know how to kill him. I said, "Why are you telling me this?" He said, "Because you saw the light, and because you were a sustainment NCO for 22 years. And because in 3 days when this falls down, I will need someone to talk to who is not in this uniform." I said, "Sergeant, this needs to come out." He said, "Halverson, if I tell those soldiers the captain is dead, half of them desert and the other half pick a side. And there are sides at all in a unit of 120 in a building made of 3 buildings on a flat piece of ground in central Indiana with no hire and no comms and an outbreak across the fence. If I tell those soldiers the captain is dead, I am the next man in their sight picture, because I am the one telling them. You understand?" I said, "I understand." He said, "So you will not tell them?" I said, "I will not tell them." He said, "Good." We sat in the bay, and the radio played a country song from 1996, and outside, somewhere, the supply run convoy was halfway back from wherever it had gone. The convoy got back at 13:40. It came in fast, the Humvee first, then the 5-ton. The 5-ton's tailgate was down. 2 men were in the bed with a 3rd man, and they were holding him down. He was screaming. I was at the window of the billet. Karen was beside me. Marcus was behind us. Dale was on his bunk and did not get up. I said to Karen, "Stay." I went outside. The 5-ton stopped in front of the medic's shop. Specialist Yates was already running across the parade square. The 2 men in the bed were Morellas and another specialist whose name I never got. The man they were holding was Private Curtis, who I had seen at breakfast that morning. He was 19 years old. He was from Muncie. He was bleeding from his left calf where something had taken a piece out of him, roughly the size of a child's fist. Yates climbed into the bed with her kit. She moved with a kind of brutal calm that I recognized because I had seen it in good medics in bad places. She got a tourniquet on him in under 90 seconds. She got him onto a stretcher. They carried him into the medic's shop. The Humvee crew was getting out. Their lieutenant was a butter bar named Ortiz, and his face was the color of a sheet of paper. He walked straight to the company office. The door opened for him. The door closed. The unit had stopped what it was doing. The unit was watching. Vance came out of the office 5 minutes later. He stood on the steps. He said in a clear voice, "We have a casualty. Resume your duties. Sergeant Hulkcom with me." The unit went back to its duties. The duties were nothing. Sweeping, painting, the made-up small motions of a reserve installation that has stopped being a reserve installation and become a stage set. But they did them. Hulkcom went into the office. I went back to my billet. Karen said, "What happened?" I said, "Bitten." She said, "Will he?" I said, "Yes." I sat on my bunk. I waited. Curtis turned at 02:20 the next morning. I know because I was awake. I had not been able to sleep. I heard the sound of him through the open windows of the medic shop across the square. It is a sound you do not forget. It is not a scream. It is not a moan. It is the particular noise a human throat makes when it is being used by something that does not know it used to be a throat. I heard the single shot at 02:23. The base did not move. Nobody came outside. Nobody asked. The shot was followed by silence. The silence was followed, 20 minutes later, by Yates walking from the medic shop to the company office, her uniform dark down the front, her face hard. She went into the office. She came out 12 minutes later. She walked back to the medic shop. She did not look at anyone. The next morning, at 0700 muster, Vance addressed the unit. He said that Private Curtis had succumbed to his injuries during the night. He said that the unit would observe a moment of silence. The unit observed it. He said that the supply run would continue on schedule. He said the captain extended his condolences. He said the captain extended his condolences. A unit of 120 soldiers, a 19-year-old man dead in their medic shop, a captain in a closed office who had not addressed them in 4 days, and a lieutenant standing at the front of a formation telling them, with his voice almost steady, that the captain extended his condolences. I knew right then that this was going to come down. I just did not know yet whether I was going to be the one who put my hand on it. I want you to think about what you would have done. Standing in that formation, knowing what I knew, knowing the captain was 3 days dead in a locked office. Would you have spoken? Or would you have let it ride and gotten your people out under cover of darkness? Tell me. I have thought about it for a long time, and I'm still not sure which of those two answers is the one I would give if you asked me tomorrow. Lieutenant Vance came to find me at 1100 that day. I was at the motor pool, helping Hulkcom's specialist with a fuel filter. Hulkcom was not there. Vance walked into the bay, told the specialist to step out, and the specialist stepped out, without asking why. I had never been alone in a room with Vance before. He was smaller up close than he was on the parade square. He looked like a young man who had not eaten a full meal in a long time. His hands shook a little. He was trying to keep them at his sides. He said, "Sergeant Halverson." I said, "Lieutenant." He said, "Sergeant Hulkcom tells me you are aware of our situation." I said, "I am." He said, "Sergeant Hulkcom tells me you have agreed not to share that awareness with my unit." I said, "I have." He said, "Thank you." He stood there for a second. He was looking at me, and he was looking at the wall behind me, and he was looking at his own hands. He was looking everywhere a man looks when he wants to say something, and he does not have any other place to put his eyes. He said, "I would like to explain myself to you." I said, "Lieutenant, you don't need to." He said, "I do." He sat down on the bench. He sat carefully, the way a man with a back injury sits. He said, "Captain Reeves had a heart attack on the night of the 17th. He had a history of arrhythmia. He carried medication for it. He had been on duty for 62 hours. He died in his chair. I found him at 0410 the next morning. I had gone to wake him for a transmission window we had with a station in Tennessee that we no longer have. I tried CPR for 40 minutes. Specialist Yates came when I called for her. She continued CPR for another 20. He was not coming back. He had been dead for some hours when I found him. I said, "Lieutenant?" He said, "I sat in that office with him until 0700. I thought about what to do. I am 26 years old. I am 2.5 years in the Army. My MOS is signal. I have no command experience. I have no combat experience. I have 120 soldiers under my command at a reserve installation during a national outbreak. I have lost contact with higher. I have lost contact with the regional command. I have lost contact with everyone. I have a unit that is functioning because their captain is functioning. Their captain was the only reason they had not come apart on day 3 when the news stopped. Their captain was a 48-year-old NCO Mustang who had been their leader for 6 years and who held them together with his presence. I sat in that office with him for 3 hours, and I tried to think about what would happen if I walked out of it and told them he was dead. And I could not see a single way that ended without bodies. He stopped. He was crying a little. He was trying not to. He said, "So I locked the office. I told Sergeant Hulkcom, I told Specialist Yates. I told the first sergeant, who was a good man named Petrowski. The four of us decided. We decided that we would buy the unit time. We would let them think the captain was alive while we figured out how to tell them. We would do the captain's voice on the morning radio checks. We would say that the captain was making the decisions. We would carry his name forward just for a few days, while we figured out a transition that did not break the unit. He said, "Sergeant Halverson, that was 8 days ago." I said, 8. He said, "Every day it gets harder. Every day the lie gets bigger. Every day there is a new thing, a new request, a new question, a new soldier who needs to talk to the captain." And I sit in that office at midnight, and I try to draft a confession, and I cannot finish it. I cannot finish it because I do not know what comes after the confession. I do not know how to be the man who tells them. And I'm running out of time, because Curtis turned and the unit knows something is wrong, and they are waiting for the captain to come out of his office and tell them it is going to be all right. And the captain is not going to come out of his office because the captain has been dead for 8 days. And I've been sitting next to him for 8 days, trying to figure out how to be his successor. He stopped. He wiped his eyes with the heel of his hand. He was shaking. He said, "I am not asking you to keep the secret forever. I'm asking you to give me a few more days." I said, "Lieutenant, the body." He said, "I know." I said, "It has been 8 days, in a closed office, in an Indiana October." He said, "I know. I keep the door closed and the heat off, and I have not eaten in there." I did not know what else to do. I said, "You need to tell them." He said, I will. I just need a few more days." I said, "You have said that for 8 days, Lieutenant." He said, "I am saying it again." We sat there. The bay was quiet. The radio was not playing. I said, "Lieutenant, what if I told you that the longer this goes, the worse the telling gets?" He said, "I know that." I said, "Then why do you keep waiting?" He said, "Because I'm 26 years old, and I have a wife and a daughter in Fort Wayne, and I do not know if they are alive, and I cannot pick up another body, not even to tell them about it. Not yet. Sergeant, I cannot pick up another body." I did not have anything to say to that. I let him sit. I went back to the fuel filter. He got up after a while. He walked out of the bay. He went back to the office. I finished the filter. I cleaned my hands. I went and found Hulkcom. Hulkcom was at the perimeter fence on the north side, where we had stood together 2 days before. He had his thermos. He held it out. I took it. I said, "Vance came and talked to me." He said, "I know. I told him to." I said, "You told him to?" He said, "I did." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because he needed to say it to somebody who was not me. He has been saying it to me for 8 days, and I cannot carry it for him anymore." I said, "Sergeant, this unit needs to know." He said, "I know." I said, "When are you telling them?" He said, "I am not telling them, Halverson." I said, "Then who?" He said, "The first sergeant should tell them. Petrowski. He is the senior man. He is the man the unit will hear it from." I said, "Has he agreed?" He said, "He has not. He thinks like Vance does. He thinks every day we buy is another day of order. He thinks the captain's name is a load-bearing wall." I said, "And what do you think?" He looked at me. He said, "I think the wall is already cracked. I think Curtis was the crack. I think the next death seals it. I think we do not have a few more days. I think we have until tomorrow morning's formation. I think if Vance stands up there one more time and says the captain extended his condolences, the unit comes apart from the inside." I said, "Then somebody has to say it tonight." He said, "Yes." I said, "Hulkcom." He said, "I know what you're going to ask." I said, "Will you do it?" He said, "I have been asking myself that for 8 days." I said, "And?" He said, "And I think the answer is yes. I think the answer has to be yes. I think I am the only senior NCO in this unit who has held men in worse than this. And I think Petrowski will not. And Vance cannot. And Yates is 26. I think it has to be me." I said, "Tonight." He said, "Tomorrow at first muster. I will not do it in the dark. I will not do it in private. I will stand at the front of the unit, and I will tell them, in the daylight, in front of their colors, what has happened to their captain. I will not let them hear it as a rumor in the dark. They will hear it from a man with their patch on his shoulder. And then we will see what they decide to be." I said, "Sergeant." He said, "Halverson, get your people ready to move at 0500. If this goes well, I will come and tell you. If it does not, you will know." I said, "Hulkcom." He said, "Yes." I said, "Are you going to be all right?" He said, "I have not been all right since the 17th, Sergeant. I have been doing my job." He took the thermos back. I said, "I should have come in here a day earlier." He said, "You came when you came. Go take care of your people." I said, "Hulkcom, the captain, the body." He said, After the unit knows. We will give him a real burial. He was a good officer. He deserves more than a locked door." I went back to the billet. I told Karen and Dale and Marcus to pack. I told them why. I told them all of it. They listened. Karen cried a little, not because she had known the captain or any of these soldiers, but because she'd been working very hard for a week not to feel anything about anyone. And the news cracked the door on it. Dale said, "We're leaving." I said, "We are getting ready to leave. Whether we leave is up to what happens at 0700 tomorrow." Marcus said his first full sentence to me in 4 days. He said, "Sergeant Hulkcom is a good man, isn't he?" I said, "Yes, he is." We packed. I did not sleep that night. I lay on my bunk and watched the small square of window above me, and I listened to the bass. At 03:45, I heard a single soft sound from the direction of the company office. I did not know what it was at the time. I would learn what it was at 0930, when we found Lieutenant Vance. The unit mustered at 0700. A unit muster outdoors in October on flat Indiana ground at sunup is a particular thing. The light comes in low across the corn, and it makes everything golden and exact. The breath of 120 soldiers makes a soft cloud over the parade square. There is no other sound in a unit muster but the small shifting of boots on gravel and the call of the sergeant taking accountability. I was at the window of transient billet 3. Karen was beside me. Marcus was behind me. Dale was at the door with our packs. The unit formed up. Petrowski, the first sergeant, called accountability. The platoons reported. They were short by 12 men. 12 men who had heard about Curtis and had not come to formation. That by itself was the largest dereliction this unit had ever logged. Petrowski did not address it. Petrowski did not address anything. Petrowski stood at the front of the formation and waited. Lieutenant Vance did not appear. After 3 minutes of waiting, Sergeant First Class Hulkcom walked out from the side of the parade square. He was in his ACUS and his patrol cap. He did not have a rifle. He had nothing in his hands. He walked across the front of the formation and he stopped at the position the captain would have stood in if the captain had stood there. He took off his patrol cap. He held it at his side. he said in a voice that carried across the parade square the way an old NCO's voice carries. Without amplification, without strain, without theater. He said, "Soldiers of the 42nd Civil Engineer Battalion Reserve, I am First Sergeant Hulkcom." Petrovsky's face did not change. Petrovsky did not move. Hulkcom said, "Captain Reeves died on the night of October 17th. He died of a heart attack in his office. He did not survive the event. Specialist Yates and Lieutenant Vance and First Sergeant Petrovsky and I made a decision that night to keep this information from you because we believed it would buy this unit. We believed it would help us hold together while we figured out how to continue. We believed we were doing the right thing. We were wrong. Captain Reeves has been dead for 9 days. We are not under his command. We have not been under his command. We are under no one's command. We have not received a higher transmission since October 14th. There is no order coming. There has been no order for 14 days. I am telling you this because you have a right to know, and because the cost of not knowing has become higher than the cost of knowing." The parade square was silent. 120 soldiers did not move. I will tell you what I saw because I was watching from the window. And I saw all of it. I saw Specialist Morellis take Specialist Chu's hand in formation. They were not supposed to. It was not allowed. Nobody made them stop. I saw a young private in the front row sit down. He just sat down on the gravel. He put his hands over his face. Nobody made him stand. I saw Specialist Yates off to the side near the medic shop, lean against the wall, and slide down it slowly until she was sitting on the ground. I saw First Sergeant Petrovsky at the front of the formation take off his patrol cap. He did it the way Hulkcom had done it. He held it at his side. And I saw Corporal Massey, 3rd row from the front, 2nd from the left, draw his sidearm. He did not raise it right away. He held it at his side, the muzzle pointed at the Gravre. He stepped out of formation. He walked 5 steps forward toward Hulkcom. He stopped. He raised the sidearm. He pointed it at Hulkcom's chest. Massey said, "Where is Lieutenant Vance?" Hulkcom said, "I do not know, Corporal." Massey said, "He should be here. He should be telling us this. He is the officer. Where is he?" Hulkcom said, "I do not know." Massey said, "You are lying to us still." Hulkcom said, "I am not, Corporal. I am telling you everything I know. The lieutenant did not come to formation. I do not know where he is." Massey's hand was shaking. The sidearm was a Beretta M9. The hammer was back. The safety was off. I could see all of this from 60 feet away because I had spent 22 years looking at sidearms, and I knew the shape of one in a man's hand at the moment he was deciding. Hulkcom did not move. He did not raise his hands. He did not duck. He stood where he was, with his patrol cap at his side, and he looked at Massey, and he said, "Corporal, if you are going to shoot me, shoot me. But know that I am the one who told you. Whatever you do with that information is yours." Massey held the sidearm up for a full 8 seconds. Then he lowered it. Then he dropped it. It hit the gravel and bounced once and lay there. He turned around. He walked, not fast and not slow, all the way across the parade square, all the way to the gate and out. He did not stop at his billet. He did not pick up a rucksack. He walked out the gate in his uniform with no rifle and no pack, and he walked west on the access road. And he kept walking until he was a small figure on the road, and then he was gone. 3 other soldiers followed him within the next 5 minutes. 2 of them walked, 1 of them ran. The rest of the unit stayed in formation, more or less. Some sat down. Some cried. Some did neither and just stood there. Petrovsky came forward. He stood next to Hulkcom. He said in a voice not as steady as Hulkcom's, but still a voice that carried, "Soldiers, I am First Sergeant Petrowski. I supported the lieutenant's decision. I am responsible for 9 days of a lie I should have ended on day 2. I am sorry. I will not ask any of you to stay with this unit because of me. I will not order any of you to stay with anything. Whatever you decide, I will support, in whatever way I am still able to support it. I am sorry." He stood there a while longer. Then he put his patrol cap back on, slowly, and he walked off the parade square in the direction of the company office. 6 minutes later, he came back out of the office. His face was the color of cement. He walked to Hulkcom. He said, very quietly, just loud enough for me to hear it through the cracked window, "Vance is in the office." He used his sidearm, about 0330 by the look. He left a letter for the unit. He left a letter for his wife. He left a letter for me. Hulkcom closed his eyes for a second. He opened them. He said, "Get Yates." I will not pretend the next 2 hours were anything other than what they were. The unit broke. Some of it, not all of it. About 30 soldiers, in groups and singly, packed their gear and walked out the gate by 0900. They went west. They went north. One small group, 4 men, went south together in a stolen Humvee that nobody tried to stop them from taking. About 20 soldiers stayed on base and refused to leave the inside of their barracks. About 70 stayed in formation, more or less, and did the work that was in front of them, moving Vance's body, moving Captain Reeves's body, beginning to dig 2 graves in the soft dirt at the south edge of the parade square, because that was what was needed. Hulkcom did the work with them. He did not stop. He did not eat. He did not sit down. He moved from one task to the next, the way a man moves through a job he has been preparing for his whole life, and that he had hoped he would never have to do. I stayed in the billet with my people. I did not go out. There was nothing for me to do out there. The unit needed to do this without me watching it. At 1100, Hulkcom knocked on the door of Transient Billet 3. He came in. He had washed his hands, but his uniform was darkened down the front. He had been carrying. He sat on the edge of Marcus's empty bunk. He said, "Halverson." I said, "Yes." He said, "You have a 5-ton out front, tanks full. There's 8 cases of MREs and a pallet of bottled water and 4 full jerry cans in the bed. There's a tarp. There's a medic kit Yates put together. There's 4 M4s and ammunition for them. There's a hand crank radio. There's a road atlas. There's a topo map of eastern Iowa with a route I thought made sense penciled in light pencil so you can erase it if you want to do it different." He had said all of that as one piece, like he had been holding it. He said, "3 soldiers want to go with you, if you'll have them. Specialist Yates, Sergeant Olafson. He's a Minnesota reservist. He was at Fort Wayne when this started. He is good people. Private Tilden. He is 19, and he does not want to be left behind. And he is a good kid, and he is afraid, and he is not going to make it on this base." I said, "We'll have them." He said, "I figured." I said, "Hulkcom, come with us." He said, "I'm staying." I said, "There's nothing to stay for." He said, "There's 70 soldiers, and a base and 2 graves to fill in proper, and a flag that has to come down right, and a base log that has to be closed out properly because we are still the United States Army, Halverson. Even if we are the only people who know we still are. There is something to stay for. It is not a winning thing. It is just a staying thing. Somebody has to do the staying." I said, "Hulkcom." He said, "Halverson, you go take care of your people and the 3 I'm sending, and whoever else you find on the road that needs taking care of. That's your job now. Mine is here." I said, "Will I see you again?" He said, "I don't know." He got up. He shook my hand. He shook Karen's hand. He shook Dale's hand. He gave Marcus a long look and said, "Son, stay close to your sister. Stay close to the sergeant. You'll be all right." Marcus said, "Yes, sir." Hulkcom said, "I'm not a sir." Marcus said, "I know." Hulkcom almost smiled, the way he had almost smiled in the motor pool 2 days before. He said, "Halverson, the flag of this base will come down at 1700 today. It will come down properly. If you are still close enough to see it, look back, and then go. And do not come back here ever, for any reason. Whatever this base becomes, it will not be a place you should bring your people." I said, "I won't." He said, "Good." He went out. We loaded our packs into the 5-ton. We loaded Karen's pickup behind it. Yates climbed into the passenger side of the 5-ton with her medic ruck, and a face that was not yet ready to be looked at. Olafson took the wheel of the pickup with Karen and Marcus. Tilden got in the cab of the 5-ton in the rear seat with Dale. I drove the 5-ton out the gate of Camp Brennan at 13:30 on the afternoon of October 26th, 15 days into the outbreak, and 9 days after Captain Reeves had died at his desk in his office with his coffee cooling beside him and his unit holding formation outside. The gate guard was Diaz, the same young soldier who had checked us in 3 days before. He was at the gate alone now. There was no second guard. The reserve was a smaller unit than it had been at 0700 that morning. And it would be smaller still by sundown. And it would keep getting smaller until either it stabilized at some honest number or it stopped being a unit at all. Diaz saluted me. He saluted me the way the gate guard had saluted on day one. Crisp, parade ground. 2 weeks late. He saluted me because he had decided to keep saluting and because the saluting was, for him, the part he could still do. I returned the salute. I had not returned a salute in 6 years. I returned this one because he deserved it. I drove out the gate. I want to ask you something. I have asked myself this question every night since. When I told Hulkcom what I knew in his motor pool that morning, I started something. I did not pull the trigger on it. Hulkcom did. Petrovsky did. Vance did, in the end, in his own private way. But I started it. If I had not come to that motor pool, and if I had not stood at his bench and told him about the office light, those 9 days might have stretched into 10 or 12, and Vance might have written his confession himself and walked out and read it to the unit, and Massey might not have drawn his weapon, and 12 soldiers might not have walked west on the access road into a country that does not have anything to give them. I do not know. I have thought about it every night for a long time. Tell me what you would have done. I am asking you. Was that the right call? Was it? Indiana State Route 28 ran flat and straight west through corn that nobody was going to harvest, under a sky that was a particular October blue. I will not see again that color in my life. The 5-ton's engine ran clean. Olafson kept the pickup in the rear view at a steady 50 yards. Yates sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the road ahead. Tilden, the kid, had put his head against the back seat window and was already asleep. I looked at the rear view at 1410. I could see Camp Brennan on the horizon, the flagpole at the southwest corner, the small, bright square of the flag. I looked again at 1530. The flag was down. Hulkcom had said it would come down at 1700. He had brought it down early. I do not know why. I do not need to know why. He had brought it down. The base behind us was not a base anymore. It was just a place where some people had decided to keep being people. We crossed into Illinois at 1640. Yates spoke for the first time since we had left. She said, "Sergeant, did we do the right thing?" I drove for a while before I answered. I said, "We did a thing.